Gemara in Pesachim, where the Gemara has a discussion. We're going to try to just speak out the Gemara outside. The Gemara is discussing the halachos of Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni is one of the Meisros that we have to give yearly in Eretz Yisrael with the crops. It's given in the 7-year cycle, the 7-year Shemitah cycle. So in the first, second, fourth, and fifth year, the farmers have to separate Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni has to be eaten specifically in Yerushalayim. We're not going to get involved in all the exact details of that halacha right now, but it does not have to be given to a Kohen or a Levi. The farmer himself eats it. Either he brings the actual produce or he redeems it for cash, brings that cash to Yerushalayim, and then can either purchase fruits or vegetables, eat them in Yerushalayim, or bring a carbon shlomim with that money. The Gemara is discussing over here in Pesachim in general the halachos of Meiser Sheni. Who owns it? Do we say that the farmer himself has full jurisdiction, full bailus over the produce and the products that he bought with that money? Or does he have certain limitations and really there's some higher entity, so to speak, that owns it? So just to focus on one discussion of this machlokes, the Gemara discusses if you buy flour and then make challah, you're making dough from this Meiser Sheni money, does this dough, are you mechayev to separate challah from it? As we know, the halacha is when you make a large amount of dough, it has to separate challah and give it to a Kohen. So if the dough is a Meiser Sheni dough, do you have to separate and give to a Kohen? Because if it's personally owned by the Yisrael, then you have to. But if it's owned by some higher entity, it's not really yours per se, then you'll be pater. And that's going to be a machlokes in the Gemara. Rameir says you are pater because you don't really own Meiser Sheni, and the Chacham hold you're chayiv to separate challah from your Meiser Sheni dough. The Gemara goes on to discuss from there what happens if you have an esrog of Meiser Sheni. Are you yoked to the mitzvah with it or not? Meaning you purchased a esrog with money that was Meiser Sheni money, and now you want to use that esrog for a mitzvah. The halacha is the pasuk says explicitly by the mitzvah of lulav and esrog that you have to own it. It has to be yours. So if it's Meiser Sheni, is that fully yours or not? So we have the same machlokes where Meir says you cannot be yotze with it, and Chacham say it's 100% yours, you could be yotze with it. The Gemara then continues on to a discussion. What about matzah? If you buy matzah for Pesach with this money of Meiser Sheni, could you be yotze the mitzvah or not? The Gemara says, what do you mean? Matzah? What's the question? Matzah doesn't have to be yours. The pasuk never says lochem by matzah. It must be yours like it says by lulav and esrog. So the Gemara answers no. We have a gezeira shava. One of the 13 ways that we expound the Torah is with a gezeira shava, and we have a gezeira shava which teaches us that we learn out from challah, the halach of separating challah, where the pasuk says ariso seichem has to be your dough, and the pasuk says the pasuk says v'haya ba'achlchem milechem haaretz, when you will eat from the bread of the land. The pasuk there says lechem, bread, and the pasuk says by matzah lechem oni. So the same word lechem. So just like by Meiser Sheni, you have to, just like by challah, you have to own the dough. So too by matzah, you have to have full bailus on it. You have to own the matzah in order to be yotze the mitzvah. So again, the Gemara suggests or brings a gezeira shava to equate matzah with the halacha of challah, the word of lechem and lechem, or the word lechem by matzah, the word lechem Meiser Sheni, and that teaches us that there is a din lochem that has to be yours by matzah, just like there's din has to be yours by challah. But again, the Gemara has a machlokas according to Rameir. Meiser Sheni is not yours, and therefore you cannot be yotze the mitzvah. According to Chachamim, they do not argue on the gezeira shava. They agree there's a gezeira shava being learned that matzah has to be yours, but they're just arguing and saying that Meiser Sheni is yours. It's considered your assets, and therefore machlokas at the end of the Gemara stands whether or not you could be yotze with matzah that is Meiser Sheni or not. Rameir says you cannot be yotze because it's not yours. The Chacham say you could be yotze because it is yours, and there's a gezeira shava in the Gemara that proves that you have to have bailus, you have to have ownership on the matzah from lechem, from lechem oni of matzah to lechem that it says by challah. That's the Gemara in a nutshell. So, okay, that's going to be the big question. So the Rishonim over here, the Rosh and the Rambam, they pass in this Gemara that it has to be yours, but what are they discussing? They're discussing a case that you cannot be yotze the mitzvah with matzah gezula. If a person would, God forbid, go ahead and steal matzah, he cannot be yotze the mitzvah because it's not yours. Although you're ingesting it, you're eating it, you consumed all the kazesim, all the amounts that you needed to eat, but since you don't own it, the Rosh says, therefore you're not yotze the mitzvah, and the Rambam passes like this, and the Shulchan Aruch passing like this as well. If someone would steal matzah, he's not yotze the mitzvah because it's not yours. So to answer the question right away, yes, we do pass this Gemara, but the Sfas Emes, which is number 2 over here on the page, points out a very interesting point, and this is not discussed in the Rishonim. He says it should follow suit from this discussion that I think by every Seder, a person finds himself in one of the following scenarios. Either he's a host, and he's hosting guests, or you're a guest at someone else's Seder. Very rarely will you find someone having a Seder by himself, right? Seder is usually some type of family setting. So either you're a host or you're a guest. So says this Sfas Emes, it should come out that if you're a guest by someone's Seder, and the host is just giving you the matzah, he wasn't makneh to you, he didn't halachically give it to you with a kinyan, you did not halachically make a kinyan. Says this Sfas Emes, it should be a problem that you don't own the matzah. And just like by lulav and esrog, you have to make a kinyan, you pick it up. If it's not yours, if you're borrowing someone, you have to take it on the understanding that you're taking it completely from them. They're giving it to you completely, and if you can give it back to them afterwards, that's not a problem. But when you're using someone else's lulav and esrog, you have to have in mind that you're acquiring it completely. So too says the Sfas Emes, it should follow that by matzah the same halacha. If you're having a guest by the Seder, or if you're a guest by the Seder, you should make sure to make a kinyan on the matzah. And the Sfas Emes is bothered that we don't see this in the Rishonim, we don't see this in the post-game. This does not seem to be a discussion of that makes this necessary. And the Sfas Emes is bothered, why not? The Torah, like we're saying from the Gemara, if the Gemara is equating matzah to challah and to lulav and esrog, where there's this positive din of lachem, it must be yours, it should also follow that matzah requires the same halacha, and therefore a person who's a guest should have to make a kinyan, and the host should have to make sure to be makneh to give over the matzahs to his guests. Now, we're going to now discuss in general, we're going to continue on to discuss, we're going to take a little break from matzah for a minute and discuss in general any other time during the year when someone is a guest at someone's house, or you're the host, how much of the food do you acquire as the guest, and how much, meaning in terms of halachic kinyanim of acquisitions, is this mine? If I'm a guest and you gave me a quarter of a chicken, do my assets now go up? I own a quarter of a chicken? Or perhaps only after I ingest it do I own it? That's where the discussion we're about to get into now. And what's fascinating about this question, I like it so much, is because it really covers Daled Chelkei Shulchan Aruch. We're going to get involved in Shalos and Orach Chaim, Yeridea, Even Ezer, and Choshen Mishpat, all the four main parts of Shulchan Aruch. Really, this question has nafkaminas, has ramifications in regards to it. So in number 3, which is a halacha in Orach Chaim, the Machaber paskins that a guest who comes into a house, he's a guest in the host's house, he's not allowed to take food from the table and feed the children of the host. That's the halacha. You cannot take, if you're a guest, you cannot take something from the table and give it to the child of the host. Now, why is this halacha? So we're not going to get involved, but in number 4, you can read the Mishnah Berurah discusses. There was a very tragic story the Gemara recounts about there was years of famine, and someone invited 3 guests to his house, and there was very scarce food. He put 3 eggs on the table, that's all he had, and each one of the guests had a lot of compassion on the children or the child of the host, and they gave the egg to the child. The father comes home, is very upset that he sees his son is holding 3 eggs, and he thinks that his son just took all the eggs and left nothing for the guests, and he unfortunately takes the life of his child. His wife commits suicide and following suit, and then he takes his life. We're not going to get involved in this tragic event right now, but the point we see is the Gemara expounds from here and other examples that this is not something we should do because it could lead to catastrophic events. Now again, it doesn't mean that every time someone who's a guest is going to feed the host children that chas v'shalom something tragic this will happen, but we're just learning from here proper etiquette in the eyes of Chazal. This is not something we want to do, we not encourage it, because often the Baal Bas will be upset with that if you don't ask him permission. So now, the Mishnah Berurah in number 4 over here brings a machlokas haposkim. Does this cover all cases, or perhaps, like we spoke at the case in the Gemara where it was originally brought up, it was a years of famine, so food was very scarce. So perhaps over there the halach is that a guest cannot feed the host children. But if you're living in modern America, hopefully Baruch Hashem, where there's an abundance of food, maybe this halach will not apply, because the same way the kid could take his own portion from the table if he doesn't have restrictions, so too the guest could feed the host children, and that the Mishnah Berurah leaves as an unresolved machlokas. So we have machlokas haposkim. At the end of the day, if, let's say, hopefully now in contemporary times where there's not a famine, and a person is a guest in someone's house, is he allowed to feed the children of the host without asking permission? We leave it, the Mishnah Berurah leaves off, it's a machlokas. So we see here, what's coming out from this halacha in regards to us? What we see here, there are certain restrictions a guest has when you're a guest in someone's house. You don't have full jurisdiction over the food to do with it as you please, because the halacha clearly here is, you cannot feed the children of the Baal Bayis. So we see here that you have a limited amount of bailus, you're limited in your ownership of the food while you're a guest. Let's continue on to number 5. And number 5 is a Ramah in Even Ezer in Hilchos Kedushin. The Ramah there is discussing a case where you're a guest in someone's house, you're a single guy, and you're a guest, and there's a nice, beautiful piece of quarter or grilled chicken in front of you, and there's a nice woman next to you who needs a shidduch, and you say, wow, this would be a great opportunity. You turn to the 2 guys next to you and say, please be Adim. You take this piece of chicken from in front of you, you give it to the girl next to you, and obviously she agrees, she will get married for a piece of chicken, and you say, Harei Mikudesh Li with this piece of chicken, and you live happily ever after. The Ramah says, this is before the days of rings. So the Ramah says the Kedushin is valid. If the Kedushin is valid, what does that mean usually that would imply that you owned it. Because the Kedushin would not be valid, seemingly, if you would take something that you don't own and marry someone with it. So it seems like from the simple reading of the Ramah, that if you're a guest in someone's house, you take food from the table and give it to somebody else sitting next to you, you can use that for Kedushin. That seems to imply that a guest has full jurisdiction, he has full mumminess, he has full ownership over the food that's placed on the table. Seemingly. Okay, very good. Hold on. We'll get there in 1 second. Excellent deed. Hold on. In the next page, number 6, the Taz on the side of the Shulchan Aruch is bothered by this halacha. The Taz in Even Ezer asks... Oh, okay, that's right. There's a lot of discussion about that. We're not going to... Let's just say... Make an easy case. We'll say it was somebody else. It wasn't the host daughter. But the Taz asks that he doesn't understand this Ramah. How can the Ramah paskin that you own the food and you can use it for Kedushin? We have the halacha which we cited previously in Orach Chaim that a guest has limitations on what he can do with the food. He can't feed the host's children. And the Taz says, based on my understanding, says the Taz, he doesn't bring a riot to this, but he says, I would say it's huadin, it's the same halacha, you can't give it to anybody else. He says it's true that the Gemara's original case, that story, that tragic event that we recounted before from the Gemara was discussing the children of the Balabayas, but the Taz says huadin, it should follow suit, it should be the same halacha, that if you're a guest, you cannot feed anybody else, you can only feed yourself. So says the Taz, what's pshat in this Ramah? Why is Ramah paskening that the Kedushin is chal? It's seemingly against the halacha in Orach Chaim that a guest has limitations on what he's allowed to take and use the food with. Says the Taz, which is it's underlined, the Taz concludes that therefore the Ramah here is only a chumrah. It's not really Kedushin, it's a suffix Kedushin. That just means that we won't allow this woman to get married to somebody else unless she gets a get me suffix. We're just treating this case a little bit severe because it's Kedushin. She's a potentially Eishes Ish. We want to make sure there's no chashash even on Mamzerim if she would marry somebody else. So it's a chumrah, says the Taz, in Hilchos Kedushin that will say this woman is married. However, if they would want to stay married, if she would want to remain married to a guy who just gives her a piece of chicken, they would have to go through a regular marriage and, like Leslie says, get a nice beautiful gold ring to consummate the marriage. But according to the Taz, he says the halacha in Orach Chaim is the guiding light here, and therefore a guest has limitations on what he can do with the food. He doesn't fully own it, and therefore, according to the Taz, the Ramah and Even Ezer is only a chumrah, and therefore the Kedushin is not vadai, it's only a suffix Kedushin. That's the Taz's understanding.
The Mishnah Berurah is saying we're only being mad.
Correct. So we're right, and but Ataz is predating the Mishnah Berurah. He's obviously going with those poskim that hold that this halach applies always. Not only does it apply always, even in years of bounty, where there's a lot of food, it also applies to people outside the immediate family of the host, which is another chiddush. We don't have time to discuss it. There's a big machlokes that place here, but that's how the Taz understands that halacha. And based on these two assumptions he's making, it comes out that the kedushin is only be suffix. But as number 7 points out, where it's underlined, this is not the consensus of many poskim. The Berhetiv over there also on Even Ezer quotes a Maharshal. The Maharshal makes a very strong distinction with Reb Neil really pointed out before. He says if you make a careful reading of the Ramah in Even Ezer, the Ramah there says about you're a guest and you've taken your portion and then you've used that for kedushin. Meaning, says the Maharshal, is going to be a sharp distinction where you're sitting at a buffet or where the host just puts out a public serving tray. Everyone takes a piece of chicken. As opposed to where you get a controlled portion. Let's say you buy a dinner or some type of affair or a wedding, and you get a portion. You have your quarter of a chicken, you have your green beans. So there it's very defined what's yours. So says the Marshal, where a person gets a defined portion, that's where the Ramah is talking about that it's completely yours. You're the guest. You have a defined portion. That is your food, and then you can use that for kedushin. The other cases we're discussing are in a setting where it's more on a public serving tray. There's just the middle of the table. The balabasta will bring out a tray of all the pieces of chicken or whatever they're serving, and then it's not defined whose piece it is until you completely ingest it. Because even though it might not be the most proper etiquette, but if let's say you would take an excessive amount of chicken onto your plate, you take 2 or 3 pieces of chicken for some reason, and it wouldn't be unheard of that if it's clean, you would say, do you mind if I put it back? It's clean. It was untouched, so to speak, right? So even though it might be on your plate, but often it's not defined, it's completely yours until you ingest it. Now, at that point might be debatable, but we're accepted for now, just to make this distinction, that according to the Marshal, what comes out is there's going to be a fundamental difference on how you're served. If you're a guest and you get a defined portion, then it's completely yours. You could take it home in a doggy bag, you can use it for kedusha, marry the woman next to you, you could give it to your dog, give it to your kids, do whatever you want, because the Balabas gave you, this is yours, have a good day, here's your food. If it's out more of a buffet style, so to speak, it's out in the open on the table, then according to the Marshal, it's not yours until you would until you ingest, until you put it into your mouth, and then there's no backseat, so to speak. Okay, so that's the distinction we're making. Yeah.
Picking up from the public plate for the will not.
So that's what I'm saying. Perhaps according to the Marshal, although you're taking from the public plate, but
picking it up, lifting it up,
right?
He will not acquire it.
Oh, you're asking because hagbah. Okay, hold on. We'll see. We'll get to that point in a minute. There's a halachic kinyan called hagbah, lifting something. So hold that thought for a minute. But one point I was just trying to make before is that just because it's on your plate, if it came from a public plate, it might not be, although depending on where you're coming from, your etiquette, but it might not be repulsive to other people if you say, well, it's clean, I'm just going to put it back. So it might not be fully yours until you actually ingest it. As opposed to where the Balabas gave you a defined portion, this is yours, even if you don't eat it later on. But Lamaisa, right now at this point, this is defined as your portion, so it's yours and you can use it for anything you would so desire. Okay, so at this point it would come out that based on this Marshal, that if you're a guest at someone by the Seder and the host gives you matzah, here is your matzah for the Seder, there was no great intention of making sure you're kinded or anything like that, but being that you're a guest, you got a defined portion of matzah, here is your matzah, you're not just taking from the middle, so to speak, so that matzah is yours. So you're sitting by the table, you're a guest at someone's Seder, here is your matzah, eat it and enjoy. He doesn't say it, but he's giving you a set amount of matzah, right, to be yotze the mitzvah by motzi matzah. So you're great, you're good to go. And therefore, this should be able to avoid this Sfas Emes's question, this Sfas Emes's original question that the guest has to actually own the matzah. So we're saying, we learned from the halacha in Even HaEzer, we see from that halacha in Kedushin, according to the Marshal and other Paiskim, that once you have a defined portion, you own it. So too, by the Seder, it should come out that if the Balabas gives you a defined portion, you own that matzah, eat it, enjoy it, and have a good Pesach. That's what would come out.
They can't take it from the tray on the table.
Yeah, you can take it from the tray on the table, that's no problem, but perhaps there's a lack there of full ownership. So if you're middle of Shulchan Aruch and you want to munch on extra matzah, there's no problem. You're a guest, and as long as there's stuff out on the table, you can help yourself. We're discussing here particularly, just to emphasize this point, I didn't emphasize really at the beginning, the main crux of the question we're discussing here is to be yotze the mitzvah of motzi matzah. When you have the positive mitzvahs say in the Torah to eat matzah. The rest of Pesach, or during Shulchan Aruch, when you want to just munch on matzah, this question is irrelevant, because of course you're a guest in someone's house, he invited you to come partake in the meal, you can eat whatever's on the table, but for here where you want to fulfill your positive obligation, the once a year mitzvah of achilas matzah on Leil Pesach, now that the Gemara was saying you have to own the matzah, so here we want to make sure you have a proper kinyan on the matzah according to this Sfas Emes, and we're saying it comes out from the Paiskim in Even HaEzer by Hilchos Kedushin that if you get a defined portion, you own the matzah.
What you're saying is, Balabas would have to go to each person and give him a matzah to show that that's his defined portion.
Well, he's passing out matzah. Yankel, this is for you. Shmuel, this is for you. This is your portion.
But usually that's not how it's done.
Okay.
Usually, the shmur matzah is in the middle of the table. Okay, I'll make a motzi on my matzah, then give you a little piece, and you fill it up with the rest of the matzahs in the middle of the table.
Okay. So if that's the case, so you might have this chisar. You have then you don't have the mile of the Marshal. You're right. I was discussing more of a case where the Balabas is defining or giving out in such a setting. You would have that as a defined portion, so you would avoid this question to begin with. Yeah.
In a situation like that, where you have the
right.
You want to make a statement on the front side.
Right. We'll get to that at the end, right? Whether that be necessary or not. But now we're just assigning. Before we get to the poskim and Hilchos Matzah per se, we're saying in general, in the sense of a guest at a table, we see from other cases in Shulchan Aruch that the guest has certain ownership, has bailus, dinei mominus on on his food in a general sense. Now, so let's get back to Ayar Leib's question a little bit now. Being that we're lechatchila dika yidin, we want to fulfill the mitzvah in the best way possible. So although we said, although we emphasized till now that according to the Marshal, if you get a defined portion, you own it already, but that's not all the poskim hold like that. And since we're dealing with a mitzvah that only comes once a year, we want to get the best possible way to be mekayim the mitzvah. So we'll go through many of the other poskim. They discuss how there are different possibilities of being koneh, how halachically you can own the matzah. So number 8 on the paper is on the second page. Is from the Chuvas Bitzel HaChachma. The Bitzel HaChachma, Rabbi Stern, was a rabbi in pre-war Europe in Hungary. After the war, he settled in Australia, and he had a big kahila over there in Australia. He passed away a number of years ago, and he has many volumes of Chuvas. So he wants to suggest, I'm not going to go through his whole lumdis, but I'll just speak out the bottom line. He wants to suggest that, forget about the whole discussion we had till now, of a guest in general, if he owns or doesn't own it, that's irrelevant. We're trying to focus to get a specific kinyan right now for this matzah. He says there's a concept we find by a ganif of something called shinui koine. If someone steals something, and then there's a shinui, a change in that item, a lot of different ramifications where that plays out. We're not going to get bogged down in those details now, but we're going to isolate this concept of shinui koine. If there's a change in the chayfetz, there's a potential kinyan. Now, in the case of someone who stole something, then you never koine it because it can be isura asliyada. It came to your hand through a prohibited manner. Meaning, if someone else would get it afterwards from the ganif in a permitted fashion, and then there was a shinui, so we say that person would own it. But okay, we're just going to isolate now. There's such a concept called shinui koine, a change in the item. It makes the acquisition, makes the kinyan. Therefore, it says the B'tzal HaChachma, it should follow that when you get a piece of matzah, forget about lifting it, even if you didn't lift it, if it was put into your mouth, by the fact that you're chewing it and swallowing it, it's very much changed forms from what it was previously. Before it was a nice piece of round matzah, now it's matzah meal mixed with saliva. So that's a shinu, that's an intrinsic change in the matzah. Says B'tzal HaChachma, that's a kinyan. That's an automatic kinyan, says B'tzal HaChachma. So he says it's very easy to avoid this whole problem of this fas emes, put it in your mouth, and ingesting it, and while you're ingesting the matzah, you made the kinyan ready, 2-for-1 special. You have the kinyan and you're swallowing it at the same time, and therefore says B'tzal HaChachma, a very easy solution to this fas emes' problem of making a kinyan. He says because there's a concept of shinui koine, and therefore automatically by chewing and swallowing and getting it down your esophagus, that itself is already a change in the item, and therefore you have made a valid kinyan. That's option number 1. However, on the next page, number 9, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Well, there's no gzela here because you're not stealing anything. You're a guest, and the owner gave it to you, so you're not a gazlan. Just a shinoi kaina. So ask Rabbi Swidler.
Are you certain that the ganef himself cannot be cut with the shinoi?
In many cases, right? I don't get bogged down.
Matza gazula, you should be yotze.
Right. That's right. So that's what he's discussing. I don't want to get stuck in that. There are potential cases where you're right. The gazlan could be kone. And I oversimplified it before, saying that usually it's a concern of isur as liyadai. If it's a complete shinoi, then right. Okay, let's just.
The opposite, interesting question. The aspect of being koine, something that's less than shit. When you have it in your mouth.
Well, that's not so simple. See in a minute, you might have a kazayat in your mouth. We'll get to that shortly. How much is in your mouth at a time? But number 9, by Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he did not like this advice of the Chuvas B'tzal HaChachma, this Rabbi Stern. He says, I thought that was a question Rabbi Swidler was going to ask me, is that the halacha of shinoi koine is only a kinyan if it was preceded. Thank you. Preceded by a kinyan genev or gezela. If someone stole something first and then a shinoi happened, then we say shinoi is a koina. But shinoi is never a kinyan by itself. Changing something by itself is not a kinyan. I can't just come over to this tissue box and just mutilate it and say, "Oh, I was koina now because I changed it." I have to first take it into my into my possession as a ganef. I'll steal this tissue box. I'll take it home. Then I'll mutilate it, and then I'll own this beautiful tissue box. That's such a thing of shinoi koina. But says Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, if there's no kinyan of geneva gazelle beforehand, there was no geneva happening beforehand, he says there does not pass. It doesn't suit here a kinyan of shinoi, and therefore he rejects this potential solution of the B'tzela Chachma and says that is not a valid kinyan. Just as a sidebar, for 1 second, I just want to point out this is what Shlomo Zalman is taking as a davar pashit, that shinoi only works that if it was preceded by a kinyan geneva is a machlekes kitzais and shach and hilchos geneva. The kitzais goes like Shlomo Zalman. Like Shlomo Zalman passed like the kitzais that you have to have a kinyan geneva gazela first. The shach does not go like this. I'm not passing the halacha. I'm just pointing out that what Shlomo Zalman is taking on for davar pashit is actually a machlekes hapoiskim and choshen mishpah. Okay.
Is stira enough for a shinui?
Is what?
Is stira enough for a shinui?
Breaking it down, yeah. Well, it's totally changed. It's mutilated, I would say, right? So therefore, it's totally different.
If you take your time, maybe he's a gospel anyway.
Well, you're a guest, I'm saying. The owner gave you permission. It's hard to say you're a ganef or a gazlan. You're a guest in someone's house. That would be pretty mean of the host and say, yeah, well, welcome to my house. You can steal anything you want. And that's not really stealing, right? So, it's hard to say that the guy's a ganef or a gazlan if he has permission, right? So let's discuss some of the other practical kinyanim that we're familiar with throughout the Gemara of how someone's kind of something. So one of the popular kinyanim is called meshicha. You pull something. So perhaps you would argue and say, what do you mean? If I'm a guest in someone's house and the guy gives me the matzah, puts it down, a foot away from me, so to speak, or 6 inches away from me, I pull it towards me. So perhaps meshicha should be kind of pulling something. However, that will be untenable over here because meshicha is only a kinyan when you're taking it out of someone's rishus into your rishus. If you're a guest in someone's house, you're still in his house. You're not taking it into your own domain. So meshicha is a kinyan when it's exiting the owner's domain and now coming into my domain or something where I have jurisdiction over. But here, where you're taking it just to your plate, that's not necessarily considered your domain, and therefore meshicha would not be a possible kinyan here. So that's kinyan down number one. What
about the Dalet Amos as far as in a Chanut is concerned? We know that by the Dalet Amos, as far as by a Penvani, that's considered your shoes.
I don't want to get... Okay, hold on 1 second for that. Hold on. Let's just discuss for a minute first Hagbah. Hagbah, like Aryeh was asking before, is a classic kinyan. You pick something up, and that's a kinyan. Even if you're in someone else's, rishus. If I go to a store and I pick something up, and obviously I paid for it, stuff like that, the hagbah itself, even though I didn't take it home yet, the fact I lifted it is a satisfactory kinyan. Now there's a machlekes throughout Shas between Rashi and Taisus and other Rishonim how much you have to lift in order to be kind of kinyan hagbah. Taisus holds, I think, 1 tefach, and Rashi and other Rishonim hold 3 tefachim. And we pass in the Chumrah, you need 3 tefachim. 3 tefachim is roughly 12 inches. So then you would have to be machmir by the Seder table to pick up the matzahs 12 inches off the table, which I'm not sure if everyone necessarily does that. You have to start measuring where your mouth is in regards to the table if you for sure got 12 inches from the table to your mouth. I'm not sure if you for sure always have that or not. Second of all, that would require specific das, kinyan. Hagbah requires das of the person who's making the kinyan. I'm picking it up for the sake of the mitzvah, and the person who owned the matzah, the owner of the house, the host has to have intention to be making it, to give it over to me. So even if I picked it up my 12 inches, I made sure I got my ruler out, and I made sure I picked it up my 3 tvachim, I would still require das for that kinyan to be valid. So it's possible that you can do that, but you just have to be conscious of the fact that you're doing that, because make sure you lift it up high enough, and that you had active das. Similar to what Rabbi Yehuda was bringing up before, there's another kinyan called kinyan chotzer. And now a yad is mitam chotzer. It's machlekes, but we paskin yad is a kinyan chotzer. So anything which comes into my hand is an automatic kinyan, even if I don't lift it, but the limit of that is, now, 1 second, Chatzir is also, someone's courtyard is a kinyan from even without das. Meaning if you have a protected backyard with a fence, and something comes into your backyard, even if you have no idea about it, you're automatically kind it. As long as you have a fence, it's considered a Chatzir mishtameres, your Chatzir is kind of that. A yad, as someone's palm of his hand, is the same halacha. However, that's only the place we speak out if it's contained within the palm of your hand. When you have a piece of matzah that's a share of a kazayas, which we'll get to shortly how much you have to eat, but let's just say, for argument's sake, for a moment, a kazayas is a half of a matzah, just for argument's sake, a half of matzah does not fit in the palm of your hand unless you crush it up, and then it'll be contained in the palm of your hand. People don't usually crush up their matzah to matzah meal before they eat it. So if you want to be kind of mitam yad, the fact that just in the palm of your hand, you'd have to have it contained completely within the palm of your hand in order for that kinyan to be active, and that's just not so practical because you don't usually crush up your matzah before you eat it. So that's another kinyan which is not going to be so active here. Okay, let's turn on to the next page. So number 11, we're back to the same tshuva which we had before, but a different part of it from the Betzela Chacham from Rabbi Stern. And he starts off saying that Lamaisa, from his taking a poll of common practice in Jewish homes, this halacha is not, people are not muzar in this meaning, and there's a lot of reason to be makel. And he says, because like we spoke about previously, really, as a guest, you have a right to eat it. Whether, like we say, like the marshal, like that you have a defined portion, or even if you don't have a defined portion, the fact that you have a right to eat it is potentially enough for the mitzvah of matzah. So therefore, he wants to dismiss the whole concern, the halacha, and he wants to point out an interesting thing, what would come out. He says there's a general halacha which many of us are familiar with on Shabbos or Yom Tov. We don't give presents on Shabbos or Yom Tov unless it's for a mitzvah. This often comes up a problem on Shabbos, Yom Tov, if you're a guest, or you're having guests and they bring something for the meal. So if you use it as part of the meal, that takes away that concern because you're using it as part of the mitzvah of Shabbos for Kiddush or for dessert, whatever it's going to be. But stop to give a person a present on Shabbos and Yom Tov is a rabbinic restriction. So says the Betzela Chachma, the only permissibility to give a present if it's a mitzvah, if you're going to use it for a mitzvah of the day, for Kiddush, let's say, right? Someone brings you a bottle of wine and use that for Kiddush, use the mitzvah for it. He says, but if we're going to paskin that really a guest has the right to use and own the matzahs even without making a proper kinyan, so if the balabas and the guest are going to go back and forth and have a discussion about making a kinyan, so that's like giving a present, the owner is like giving a present to the guest on Yom Tif, and that is a potentially rabbinic restriction. You'll say it's a mitzvah, but there's no mitzvah here because you have enough right as a guest to eat it anyway. So you want to be machmir for something which is potentially running into a collision with another rabbinic restriction of giving a present. So therefore he wants to say that you should not give the present on Shabbos or Yom Tov, you should not give the present of matzah because all you're getting yourself now involved in is another machlokes hapaiskim of whether or not you're allowed to give it or not. You'll say, perhaps you'll argue, what do you mean it's a mitzvah? But maybe it's not really a mitzvah because I don't need to have a kinyan on it per se to be able to the mitzvah. So he says, therefore he wants to avoid the whole shaila and say, you don't have to make a positive kinyan and you can just be a guest and eat the matzah.
So if they brought matzah as a gift,
right?
It's your matzah. You've got your matzah. We continue on.
So if the guest brings matzah
as a gift, now they have their own matzah to give it back.
Okay, perhaps that's arguable. Fine. Okay, we're running out of time. Of course, we got to cover some more ground. As you continue on throughout the papers, you'll see number 12 and number 13. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he paskins also that Me'ikar Adin, you're a yotze even without a kinyan. The guest is yotze without a kinyan. However, he says there's an inyan here to be machmir, but he says Lamaisa in number 13 he speaks out. We're not going to go through lumdus right now, we're running out of time, but he speaks out a reason why he could say you could be mekel. But again, according to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and according to the Tzala Chachma, you don't have to be machmir. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach just says if you want to be machmir, he allows you to be machmir, but he says you don't have to be. You're 100% yotze without the kinyan of particularly doing the kinyan for the matzah as a guest.
And that's because according to Shlomo Zalman, he speaks out a different lumdus, but according to what we said before, it's really because a guest always has either he owns it because it's a defined portion, or the right to eat as a guest is enough of a bailus, is enough of an ownership that can be owed to the mitzvah with it. You don't have to have as much as a bailus, which is really something we did speak out also from number 10, and the Imre Bina speaks out that since the whole limud here is only a gezer shal, like we started off, the Gemara said, the pasuk never says explicitly by matzah, it's lachem, you have to own it. It was a gezer shava in the Gemara from lechem, from halacha of challah, which followed suit to get that you have to own the matzah. So Imre Bina, which was a number 10, wanted to suggest, since it's only a gezer shava, it's only an expounding from the Torah, it's not explicit in the Torah, so the fact that you have the right to eat it, that's enough ownership for this case, and you can be owed to the mitzvah.
So how would you answer it?
Okay, let's just speak out one before we get into that question. In number 14, the Ruvay Ephraim, Rabbi Greenblatt Zatzal from Memphis, Rav's father, so he brings from Rav Yashiv that you should be machmir. It is right to be machmir. He says, but of course, if you didn't do it, you're still yod to the mitzvah 100%. I also saw brought down in Rav Nevin Sol Shlitas Haggadah, he brings B'Shem Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, his uncle who's Rosh Yeshiva in Mir, who also wanted to be machmir. But everyone agrees, even if you want to be machmir, you're yod without it. Now, to answer this question, what's the best way to be yod if you want to be machmir? So there's different ways. Either you could buy your own matzah, bring your own matzah as a guest. That's one way. It solves all problems. Don't rely on the host. Okay. But
if you're in my situation, so I'm invited to my parents' house, I'm not going to start bringing in boxes of matzah. So either before Pesach, you can say, could you be making some matzahs now? But the issue over there is going to be you have to have defined which matzahs. You can't just say in general, give me all the matzahs, right? You have to have defined. So if you want to be machmer, then on Pesach itself, by the Seder, the host, the father, whoever's leading the Seder could just give you these matzahs. This is for you to be kind of the mitzvah. You take it, it's yours to be kind of the mitzvah. You for sure have the marshal that anytime you have a defined portion, it's automatically yours. If you want to pick it up, you can pick it up. You have multiple options how to be kainit, how to fulfill this chumrah. But again, we're not emphasizing it's a chumrah, and you for sure yotze without it. So if you're ever in a situation where you're a guest and you're not comfortable speaking out with the Baal Bayis, or you're a host and you're not comfortable speaking out with your guests, as long as it's understood that you're being yotze the mitzvah, and that's why you're here for the Seder, to be yotze the mitzvah's halayla, then you can be yotze with that matzah, and you can be yotze your mitzvah, and there's no problem. Okay, that's point number one of acquiring. Now let's quickly try to cover some of the halachos of ingesting matzah. In the next page, on number 15, we have the halacha. We're up now to motzi matzah. We're in the middle of the Seder, motzi matzah. So the common practice is that we have 3 matzahs by the Seder. By the time motzi matzah comes around, we have a whole one, a half one, and a whole one. For the first bracha, we hold all 3. Then for the bracha of alachilas matzah, we drop the bottom one and we hold just the top 2. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins, which is over here in Siman Taf Ayin Hey, that since you made 2 brachos, one for the general mitzvah of Lecha Mishnah, which that's why he held all 3, and then one particularly for the bracha of alachilas matzah, he wants you to eat 2 kizesim, 2 shiurim worth, for lack of a better word, we'll translate kizayis as an olive, although contemporary poskim always say that you have to eat more than what an olive looks like. Although an olive is about this size, you have to eat more matzah than that, but okay, well, don't get involved. You look in your regular Pesach Haggadah how much you have to eat, but you have to eat 2 kizesim worth, says the Shulchan Aruch. Now, the poskim speak out that from the simple reading of the Lashon of the Shulchan Aruch is coming from a Rosh and other Rishonim, it sounds like you have to ingest both these 2 kizesim at the same time. Because while you're eating 2, the Mishnah Berurah speaks out in 16, a number in Eis Vav, you're eating 2 because since you made 2 brachos, one for the alachilas matzah, one for the regular Matza Lecha Min Haaretz, and they were going on different matzos, therefore says the Mishnah Berurah, you have to make sure to get 2 kizesim in. Not only says the Mishnah Berurah, it continues on in Eis Test where it's underlined, you have to make sure to get 2 kizesim in at sum total, but he says since it's a suffix by the brachos, and you don't want to have a hefsek between the brachos, so from a simple reading of the Mishnah Berurah, it comes out they have to ingest at one time 2 kizesim of matzah, which is quite difficult for most human beings in this era, especially the way our matzahs are fashioned. They're thin, hard crackers. We don't have the Yemenite matzahs where it's more chewy and the softer, more of a lafa type of form. Our matzahs, it's humanly impossible to do this. Therefore, the contemporary poskim, you'll see you go through the Stipler, the Chazon Ish, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and 18 and 19, and others all say that this is not something we do l'maisa. They all say we eat matzah in the regular fashion. You should l'chatchila eat the 2 kizesim if you're the Baal Bayis. We don't have time to harp on this right now, but if you're a guest or you're not the one leading the Seder, you don't have to eat the 2 kizesim. You only have to eat a 1 kizayis because you didn't make the bracha. Only the person who's making the brachos, he has to eat the 2 kizesim because he has the suffix. Everybody else, they'll suffice for them to eat only 1 kizayis. That's a side point. But what comes out
being from 1 matzah or from both matzahs?
That's a good question. Seemingly from 1 matzah is enough. You don't have to dafka, and not everybody by the table specifically has to get a piece from both of the matzahs. They should get at least something from one of the matzahs, but it doesn't necessarily have to be from both for the rest of the table. Okay. Again, so according, let's just we have to end up. So let's say according to the Chazon Ish, the Stipler, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and you'll see on the next page, Moshe Feinstein in 21 held the same way. He told the two of his Talmidim of Tovi Goldstein and to Ephraim Grimad Zatzal the same idea that it's impossible nowadays the way our matzahs are fashioned to stuff your mouth. Like, according to Shlomo Zalman, he said it's an achila gasa. It's not a way that humans eat to stuff your mouth with 2 kizesim of matzah that your cheek should bulge out. like really wide. So you eat it in the regular share amount of time. And Shem Zalman goes on and talks about, if you look at number 20, Shem Zalman is very upset about those people who eat matzah like this. They take their watch and they go, and they try to stuff it in because they want to get in within the amount of time. You're supposed to eat it within 3 or 4 minutes. That's the shear. So they're so concerned about that they're sitting there with their watch, with the second hand watch and the second thick way. Make sure they're chewing really fast to do that. He says if you can eat looking at your watch, you're going to miss the Iker mitzvah. The Iker mitzvah is to have kavanah. I'm eating this achilas matzah for the shame of the mitzvahs, asayim, the raisa, of the fact we left in Mitzrayim for this night, etc. And if you're going to be looking at your second hand the whole time you're eating, you're going to miss out Iker kavanah mitzvah. And that's not the way Jews fulfill mitzvahs, by looking at clocks. You have to keep in mind, you have to consume within a short amount of time. That's true, but stay focused on the matzah. Don't stay focused on the second hand. That's B'Shem Zalman Orbach. Okay, there's machlekes. You get anywhere from 3 to 9 minutes. So I just said 3 to 4. That's the most chomer dekashir. You have 6 minutes. Other poskim, some poskim extend it all the way to 9 minutes. That's beyond the scope of this discussion right now. But anywhere between 3 and 9 minutes. Let's say 5 minutes for middle line. The last shot we're going to discuss now, the digesting the matzah, is from the Tshuvas Torah Lishma. The Tshuvas Torah Lishma was written by a pen name. It's called. He writes. Look at the end. It says Yecheskel Kicholi. Most people ascribe these tshuvas to the Ben Ish Chai. It's debatable, but most people ascribe it to Rabbi Yosef Chaim, the chief rabbi of Baghdad, and he wrote these tshuvas when he was in jail. There was a whole story for a period of years. He was in jail. A whole story. He was framed, and he wrote those tshuvas then without any other svarim. And but some people debate that it wasn't written by him; it was written by a different svarim he wrote. But that's the general acceptance that it's written by the Ben Ish Chai. But he discussed the following shaila. Now we can all imagine our seder. It's about 12 o'clock at night. We've had a delicious diet so far of cream red Concord, a little piece of celery or potato, and we just ingested a lot of kazesim of matzah. A little bit uncomfortable in the stomach, perhaps. And unfortunately what might happen, the question was asked him, is that a person at this point might regurgitate that which he ate. It might come back out through his esophagus, and then he's too nauseous to continue eating. And he expelled already that which he ate. He couldn't hold it down. But now he's very concerned. He ate the matzah, but it didn't stay down, in his belly for too long. He very quickly expelled it. So is he yotze the mitzvah or not? Because he didn't digest the matzah properly. So he starts off with a shaila. He starts off with a Gemara in Chulin, where the Gemara there is discussing this machlokes Rabbi Yechon and Rish Lakish. She brings the opinion of Rabbi Yechon. That's how we paskin. If someone eats a chatzi zayis of isra, let's say someone eats a half zayis of chazir. He eats a half of shear of pork, and then he throws it up. He vomits it, and then he eats another chatzi zayis shortly afterwards, and then throws it up. Is he chayiv or not? Now, of course, it's usher to eat even the smallest amount, but to have an einish, you have to have a shear, kazayis of the isser. So the Gemara there, Rabbi Yechanan paskins that yes, it's mitzdaref, and that's how we paskin. The Rambam paskins by achilas asuros, by chalas asuros, that if a person eats something prohibited, regurgitates it, then eats another, either the same or another piece of it, you're going to be chayiv as if you ate a whole shear. So it says the Tshuvas Torah Lishma, the Ben Ish Chai, be the same halacha in regards to mitzvahs. If someone eats the required amounts for a mitzvah, and then even if he regurgitates it afterwards, he vomits it, nonetheless, since he had the achilas hanas groina, he ate it, he ingested it, he fulfilled his mitzvah, and then he does not have to eat anymore. He could yotze with that. Now you have to eat afikaimin and other matzah later in the meal if you're able to, but you yotze your chiyuv of achilas matzah. But now the question remains, do you bench or not? Because he didn't hold down any food. Now obviously the guy's too nauseous, he's not going to eat shulchan aruch, he's not going to eat shulchan aruch, he's not going to eat the meal, but does he have to bench on the matzah that he ate? And that he paskins that you do not bench because there was no visavata, there was no satiation at all. Since you expelled all the food, you do not have to bench, and that is a accepted halacha. Many paiskin, the Ben Ish Chai also pass like this in the Sefer V'Zois HaBracha, which our Frank learns after Ma'ariv every night. He passed like that also if someone, by any meal. If someone throws up or vomits after the meal and does not hold down his food, you do not bench. However, I just want to point out that's the general consensus of place. That's how we pass it by matzah and any other halacha of eating. There's another halacha which also often comes up by a Sudas Purim. Someone who ate the Purim Suda and also drank a little too much alcohol, and unfortunately caused him to expel everything that he ate by the meal. Was he yotze his Suda or not? So if you go like we're saying till now, of course you yotze the Suda. Unfortunately, you made someone's kitchen floor a little dirty or something, but you yotze the Suda of the Chiyuv of Sudas Purim. However, Shmuel Kamenetsky paskins that since you did not keep the food down, you were not yet to the mitzvah, and according to him, you have to re-eat the Sudas Purim, and according to him, you would have to also re-eat the matzah, but that's not the consensus of contemporary of many other paiskim, and therefore we'll go with the regular psak that even if you don't hold down the food, you get to the mitzvah. So I want to end off, the Chassam Sofer writes in Shuvas that we have to be very careful with the mitzvah of achilas matzah. He writes it's the only mitzvah we have in the Torah that's still applicable b'zman hazeh regarding the halacha of achila, of eating. B'zman Beis Hamikdash hayikayim, we had many mitzvahs of achilas karbonis, even for a regular Jew, even if you weren't a kayan, you had achilas shlomim, achilas carbon pesach. Many times throughout the year, you get actually a mitzvah, a big mitzvah of eating. The only active mitzvah which we have, the mitzvah say a positive commandment to eat a particular food during the year, the only time that still exists, says Chassam Sofer, is Pesach night, and therefore he writes, it behooves us to do the best that we can to make sure we fulfill this mitzvah properly, because who knows if we'll be able to fulfill it again, and hopefully we should all be zeicha this year to be not only be yotze the mitzvah of matzah properly, we should also be yotze the mitzvah of Korban Pesach with the coming of Mashiach to Kingdom here.
The bottom line is because the balabot puts the matzah out and you eat,
According to most places,
and you pick it up and you